Go back to places bill, because there's just a few witnesses signed up on that, starting with Major Callahan, and then I have Brian Zakrowski. I'm sure I didn't say that name correctly, and then Pat Ford. All three of you can come up if you're here and interested in speaking. Signed up first, so if you'd like to go first, great.
Well, good evening, Chairperson and committee. My name is Major General Chris Callahan. I serve as the 44th Adjutant General for the state of Rhode Island and the Commanding General of the Rhode Island National Guard. And it is a privilege to kind of spend a few minutes with you. I'll be cognizant of your timing there, but we do have a little bit of what I would consider some tricky authorities in play relative to the Defend the Guard bill. It's not lost on me at all that Rep Place, the reps that have brought this forward, the colleagues sitting to my left, that it may seem odd to you that I am in opposition to this bill to a great degree. And the reason why is fairly sort of clear, and that is because the National Guard, the Army National Guard, the Air Force, or Air National Guard as we call it, is the primary combat reserve of the Army and the Air Force. What that means is that we have a standing role that we've always had since 1916 plus, but has been amplified obviously over the last 23 plus years post 9/11. So what I would share with you today is I wouldn't lead with the money. The money component is important, but really the reason behind this is why the money. And the reason we receive federal funding in the vicinity of $200 million is to be able to have our 3,100 members of the National Guard in their various capacities be able to meet the needs of what America's duly elected officials ask us to do. We're a nonpartisan organization. What I feel, despite the title of the legislation, is I feel that we are being used as a pawn in a greater argument that may or may not have legitimacy. It's not for me to decide here as a military officer, about the utilization of the military and the authorities that the president has. That's not my concern. It's not the concern of military officers how we are our opinions in that regard. Our job is to make sure that our orders are legal, moral, and ethical, and that's where we need to be focused. I would share with you that I would, without trying to take us down a rabbit hole, I would highly push back on Representative Place's sort of thought process on how this would impact the National Guard. I will share with you a couple of just, common, very applicable examples where the representative mentioned that, as an example, the Army Aviation or our helicopter unit is not a combat unit. That is simply not true. I was the commander of that unit some almost 20 years ago and served with that unit proudly for a year in Iraq. It has deployed 4 times, plus its most recent deployment coming back from Kosovo. So these units that are, in his terms, combat support or combat service support that the Rhode Island National Guard manages are all exposed to combat. So given his particular theory, I would argue that the impact to us would be very great. The second thing I would share with you is that as the operational combat reserve of the military, it is those tools that we use to support the governor and to support the state in the work that we do locally. So there is an argument in play that with the National Guard deployed, that they may be impacted negatively with their ability to respond to an all hazards event, to defense support to civilian authorities. And that simply is not true. It has not occurred, certainly here in Rhode Island, ever, and hasn't occurred on a national scale in over a decade. So I would share with you the last piece, and again, I try to keep very clear of policy, but I would share with you that today, this morning, the National Governors Association put out a press release that goes this way. National Governors Association Chair Governor Spencer Cox of Utah and Vice Chair Governor Jared Polis of Colorado released the following statement on the erosion of governors' authorities and consultation regarding National Guard assets. Governors on both sides of the aisle call for the immediate discontinuation of legislative proposals that endanger or deny the full and legitimate authority of governors to act in the capacity of commander-in-chief of their respective National Guards across the state and territories. This legislation would negatively impact the governor's ability to command and control our organization. Legislation that eliminates or reduces the authority of governors pertaining to National Guard units within their state, including missions, equipment, or personnel, undermines trusted historical partnerships, decades of precedence in mission readiness and operational efficacy. So in closing, I would just share with you that our role is multidimensional, that there is a reason why the money matters, and that is because our 3,100 citizens and soldiers, by the way, we are served by many different states that serve in the Rhode Island National Guard. It's just not Rhode Islanders. And we utilize those funds to ensure that we have ready units that are well-led, well-equipped, well-trained, safe to go forth and do what duly elected officials ask us to do. That's our job. This legislation impacts the ability of the governor to control the organization, which I think is negative in nature. Not the governor's control, but the impact to the governor would be negative. And so therefore, I am in non-concurrence, subject to your questions.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, Pat Ford, welcome.
My name is Pat Ford, and I'm testifying today in my capacity as a member of the Libertarian National Committee, the Board of Directors of the Libertarian National Party. The Libertarian Party is America's fastest-growing political party. A significant portion, and to the relevance of this comment, is the party's growth is directly tied to the presence of Gulf War veterans who have coalesced nationally around the Defend the Guard legislation. As Libertarians, we believe that the manner in which we accord our troops respect should not be a reflexive thank you for your service, but the rise in protests against engagement in economically driven foreign misadventures, police actions, and proxy wars, which serve to place the brave men and women who serve our nation in mortal danger. This legislation is straightforward: to forbid the national government from conscription of National Guard troops absent a formal declaration of war. The current approach to overseas military deployment is the enactment of an authorization for use of military force, AUMF, a political dodge that defers ultimate decision-making to the executive branch. By abdicating their responsibility, Congress is refusing to exercise its duty under the United States Constitution. It is my belief that this legislation will effectively force the federal government to revert to the constitutionally mandated congressional declaration of war. Additionally, history is replete with examples of National Guard troops serving overseas during times of great tragedy, at home and in the United States. The best example, or the worst example, depending on your perspective, is, of course, Katrina. While I believe somewhere along the lines of 51,000 National Guard troops were deployed in direct service, it has been alleged, with significant support, that a number of the Humvees, particularly those trained for, if you will, deep water, as well as an organization in Louisiana that was centered around levees, was effectively deployed to Iraq and overseas. And in fact, it has been suggested, and by a number of folks, that in fact, during the quadrennial review of defense spending and defense purposement, if you will, that in fact the National Guard should revert back to its founding force as a domestic unit serving in times of disaster and great national need. If in fact it is the role to serve as the American Army Reserve, shouldn't the Army Reserve in fact be the current force for deployment? Opposition to this legislation often focuses on the federal funding mechanism that serves to subsidize the state National Guards. Current Arizona Congressman Gosar spoke directly to this issue, and I'm quoting, "Some opponents contend that passage of this bill would potentially threaten the National Guard, Arizona National Guard federal funding. This is incorrect. There is nothing in federal law that would eliminate federal funding if Arizona passes the Defend the Guard Act. nor would Congress pass such legislation. The federal government needs a well-prepared Guard. I pledge that under no circumstance will I allow any administration to fund our state's National Guard. I know the House of Representatives would not approve such dereliction and nonsense, and the House controls the purse strings. Finally, let's talk about the movement nationally. The movement's growing. In the state of New Hampshire this year, this legislation passed their state house and currently sits in the state Senate. In the state of Idaho, the state Senate passed it, and it's currently sitting in their house. Arizona, it passed the state Senate. In Texas, a non-binding resolution in the Republican primary, there was an 84% non-binding GOP resolution in favor of this legislation. Defend the Guard legislation is in active consideration in excess of 26 states. We urge passage of this legislation in Rhode Island, the true birthplace of the American Revolution. Thank you very much.
Any questions of the witness? Thank you, Mr. Ford. Brian?
Yes, thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. I served in the United States Navy from 1999 until 2008. I was serving in the Navy in 2005 on the USS Ronald Reagan in San Diego. I'd been left behind for a school, and on the first day of school, I awoke to a series of emails. Those emails included, at the end, word that my best friend died from an accident on board the ship. I was one of the 2 people that brought him home to his family. When we got there, I was told that I needed to open up the casket, and I apologize for this, to make sure that no embalming fluid had leaked during the pressure changes from the flight. I can't imagine what his family went through. I can only speak to what I went through. I had significant troubles, nightmares, and I went to my command and let them know the difficulties that I was having. I wound up in the office with the senior enlisted member of the command master chief, who told me to not go see a therapist because they might put me on antidepressants, and that could have me lose my job as a nuclear electrician's mate. I was told to not go see a therapist. Now, the National Guard made up approximately, in 2015, 45% of forces that had been deployed and 18% of the 7,000 casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those people are coming back and potentially encountering the same advice that I got. In the U.S., in 2018, the DoD annual suicide report noted that in the U.S., all of U.S., 18 per 100,000 people commit suicide. Active duty military was 24.8, and the National Guard was 30.6 per 100,000, almost double that of the U.S. population. We have people that are coming back from undeclared wars that are unsustainable without National Guard support, and they're being forgotten. So you can help that by supporting House Bill 7389. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the witness? Representative Tanzi.
I'm very sorry for your trauma, and it shouldn't have necessarily been a part of the service that you gave to our country, and I'm sorry that that happened. I, as an elected official, understand the desire to shirk my responsibility on a tough vote from time to time, but that's not what my constituents have sent me here to do. I think the fact that we haven't declared an act of war since World War II, just prior to World War II, is a problem created by people who are not willing to take a hard vote. And I find that shameful in regard to what we ask of you who do serve in the military to take on. With all due respect to Major General Callahan, I understand your mission, I understand where you get your directive, but I think that those who are elected to office owe you, at a minimum, a declaration when you ask your soldiers, airmen, Marines to go into active combat. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Tanzi. Any other questions of the witness? Thank you. That concludes testimony on 7389.